Have you ever wanted to start a podcast? You're listening to this one. Maybe you're sitting there thinking to yourself, I could definitely do better than this idiot. Well, that's not very nice, but I do have a show for you. My guest today is Jovica Djurdjević. He is a tech sales guru. He's a podcaster. He's a father of one. And he's actually the reason why this podcast is here. He helped me get it off the ground. We're going to dive into everything you need to know about how to start your own podcast, why most podcasts fail, the right tech to use, and a lot more. This is Anthony Francis. You're listening to the Successful Working Parents Podcast, where we learn from busy working parents how they're able to balance it all and still thrive. Thank you for listening. Now, on to the show. Welcome back to the Successful Working Parents Podcast, the podcast where we talk to successful working parents. Title is still pending. My guest today, he is the host of the podcast, The Road Less Babbled. He's a real estate investor. He's a software sales guru, father of one. He's also the reason why this podcast even exists. Ladies and gentlemen, Jovica Djurdjević. Jovica, welcome to the show.
Whoa, thank you. But I gotta hold on. I gotta take a step back there. Yeah, maybe I did a little consulting, but you're the reason that exists.
You're certainly a big part of it and a big inspiration for it. So we'll get into that. But why don't you give the audience a quick introduction of yourself?
Well, I appreciate that. Jovica Djurdjević, live in Nashville, Tennessee. Like Tone said, father of one, married to my wonderful wife. Have lived in Tennessee since I was 10 years old. Before that, lived in Germany. And before that, I'm from what was Yugoslavia, what is now Bosnia. Hence the very, very unique name in America and very, very basic pumpkin spice latte name over there. So real simple. Yeah, live in Nashville, have dabbled in all kinds of things throughout my career, have owned a couple businesses, have worked for a couple businesses, have gotten into real estate, have gotten into consulting, have built out, just different avenues of career, as you might call it. So yeah, excited to be on here and share.
Yeah, well, today the avenue I want to focus on is the podcasting. So yeah, you and I worked together at my previous employer, and you had already had a podcast for a while, and that was sort of something I'd always been wanting to do. And so it actually happened to be after I had left. Then we started talking. You said, "Hey, if you ever want to get started with a podcast, like let me know. I'd be happy to help." And you did help me get started. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey and how you started your podcast. Maybe from just before you had it, just the thought, why start one, and what you were thinking about at the time.
Interesting question, because I always joke and I say I got a podcast before everybody got a podcast. So I was
now everybody does have one.
Yeah,
sure.
everybody and their mom has one, which I have cashed in on that part. So that has been nice.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it goes back to kind of the conversation of being, an immigrant, a refugee family, being the oldest child in the immigrant family. So you learn how to speak English the fastest. So, hey, congratulations. You're translating mortgage documents at 11 years old. You're the one scheduling doctor's appointments. You're doing all these things. So communication becomes a very quick and effective tool that you figure out how to work out of necessity. And it also forces you to grow up quicker than your peers. So pretty much every firstborn immigrant family child that I know says the same exact thing, is like you become an adult faster, which by virtue of that gives you some wisdom a little bit earlier, because you are doing all these things where you're having to learn, like, oh, the world doesn't come to an end if I have a problem. I can figure it out. Which just kind of naturally led to my peer group and my friends throughout high school, college, and even into the professional world coming to me for advice. And you get really good at listening, and you get really good at taking complex topics and simplifying them to help others understand, because that's what you had to do with your parents when you were 12, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of a natural transition. So over the years, as podcasts started becoming more and more of a thing, around 2016, 2017, people were telling me, like, hey man, you need to start a podcast. You need to start a podcast. And I was like, that sounds like a lot of work, and I really don't feel like doing that. And eventually I got bullied into it. I think the straw that broke my camel's back was my father-in-law, but it was a long line of, bullying, I would call it. They would call it slight nudging. Yeah, encouragement. And March of 2018, I recorded my first episode and ran with it from there. And it was one of the most fun journeys I can imagine. The types of people I got to interview, the conversations I got to have, the communication skills that I improved, the listening skills that I improved, just everything along the way was just fascinating. And just the general like technical skills of learning how to edit, learning how to put together the flow of an episode, learning how to ask strong questions, and just effective communication. And it's just been one of the most fun journeys I've taken in my life.
So, what is the road less babble? Then, what was it at conception? Is it the same as it was when it started?
So the road less babbled originally started as millennial manhood. Millennial manhood was a topic that I chose because I felt like, especially in 2017, 2018, the conversation around what it meant to be a man was incredibly polarized. And 99.99999% of people don't fall into that polarized camp. They're just regular humans trying to be good humans, right? And whereas what you were hearing in the social discourse was, if you have an X and Y chromosome, you're evil on one end, and then on the other end, it was like the red pill crap of like men going their own way. And like again, 99.9% of people don't fall anywhere in between there, right? Most dudes are just like normal human beings trying to figure out life. And I've found it that men aren't really good at sharing their stories with each other. So we end up reinventing the wheel. So I wanted to create a space where men could share their stories. Fast forward a couple, like 100 episodes or whatever. And I'm looking at my stats and I'm like, damn, most of my listeners are women. And like 90% of the people who would reach out to me on Instagram or whatever were women thanking me for episodes like, hey, I shared this with my husband. I shared this with my kid. I shared this with my brother, blah, 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 blah. And my wife brought up a good point. She was like, well, I mean, it's in women's best interest for men not to suck, right? I was like, well, that's very valid. um, and I had been interviewing women anyway. I never just interviewed men. That was never the point of it. So around 100 episodes, I decided, I'm just changing it to the road less babble, because let me change it from men not sharing their stories to just humans not sharing their stories. Um, and I just I kept the same concept. I just made it more general in that sense.
What are some of the lessons that you've learned since podcasting? I mean, we're talking about 6 years now, right?
Yeah. The first answer you get is never the real answer. Step number one. So you have to be able to figure out, if you want an honest answer from somebody, you have to be able to ask that. You have to be able to ask that question essentially 3 times in 3 different ways in 3 different timings, to where they're not caught on to where you're asking the same question. So they'll give you an answer. It's typically a canned answer, especially when you're dealing with people. So I've interviewed New York Times bestselling authors. I've interviewed, YouTube celebrities or whatever you can call them, like people who do interviews. So they've got canned answers to questions, and I hate those answers because I don't think they're real. So, but obviously I don't say that. So I just put a pin in it, and a couple questions later, come back to that same exact question, word it a little bit differently. Get the second answer. Okay, we've got a little bit more. Put a pin in it. A couple questions later, come back to that same question, word a little bit differently. Oh, now we got the real answer. Oh, you just gave me a plethora of pieces that we can follow, and then we'll go from there. So that's one thing. And then the other thing that actually really disappointed me about people, I would always do a pre-recording call with folks, and a lot of times there would be like one cadence, one way they speak on that, and we would hit it off and it'd be great. And then we'd have the actual recording, we'd hit record, and their entire demeanor and personality would change. So there are multiple times where I've stopped interviews and been like, we're either starting this over or we're not doing this, because I did not sign up for this.
Oh my God. Should I ask you that question a couple more times to get the real answer, or does it not apply?
Go for it, bro.
Does it not apply in this tip question? What about like any surprising benefits from it? Anything that happened that you weren't expecting to happen?
I've made an obnoxious amount of money off of it. Not off of like ads.
Right.
I've never advertised on a podcast. I've made an obnoxious amount of money off of it, off of the opportunities it opened up to me for either, like real estate or coaching or consulting or in a sales role. I did not go into it expecting that would happen.
Yeah.
And it's been the greatest networking tool ever.
So the monetization hasn't come from the podcast itself, but all the networking opportunities.
Yeah, I was too late to really cash in on monetization.
Yeah.
Like people don't realize this, but like the monetization game in podcast, unless you're a Joe Rogan, is useless. I mean,
right.
Think about it. The Obamas had their podcast contract canceled.
Right.
Like, what am I going to do?
Yeah. Yeah, because you have to have like hundreds of thousands of impressions for the ads to be worth anything, right?
Right. And at this point, it's not just impressions, but they actually have to listen to that to a certain amount of the ad. So you're talking about you need 10,000 impressions at like 15 seconds for the ad or whatever for $8. So even if you, I mean, and I was in the hundreds of thousands at one point, but that's still what, like $80.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
that's not any money.
Right. Yeah. So, do you think most people today that are doing podcasts, they're using it more as like a content creation tool and an avenue to other things, as opposed to like a business in itself?
I think they use it as a business in itself, but I don't think they're going down the traditional route of the way people used to make money off of it, like 2014, 15, 16, 17. I think they're doing it. If they're doing ads, they're doing individual ads that they have individual contracts with. Where it's not, an impressions based contract. It's more of a, hey, we're talking about this specific product. Or if they have a massive audience, I mean, people are still monetizing it as another revenue stream. I just don't like the idea of somebody else being able to tell me, hey, I don't really like what you're talking about because my ads are on it. But yeah, I think the place where people are really cashing in is in generating business opportunities. If they're, in real estate, generating real estate deals, if they're in consultant, generating consultant deals, whatever. I would encourage anybody who wants to start a podcast. um it's a great way to create free content to humanize yourself to others. And the thing that happens is I've had people here in Nashville stop me and be like, Yava, I'm like, who are you? They're like, oh dude, I love your podcast. I'm like, bro, that is wild. um they feel like they know you.
Yeah.
They've never met you.
Yeah. So you do some consulting work for people that want to get started with podcasts, whether it's someone like me with a personal brand or an actual business. What are some of the reasons to start a podcast in general?
I mean, the biggest one I just mentioned, the humanization of you. It makes it so much easier to generate business when people do business with people they like. It's as simple as that. Cold calling essentially is dead. Um, LinkedIn messages, I mean, yeah, they were great in 2014, but have you checked your LinkedIn inbox? Like, who's going to respond to that, right? So people just buy differently now. Whatever you're selling, because everybody's selling something, right? If you're an engineer at a company, you're selling your boss and why you should keep your job. So everybody's selling something. So I think that is a fantastic reason from a business standpoint, but also the journey from a personal standpoint, the journey of self discovery in those podcasts, in those episodes, in those discussions. Man, you just learn so much about yourself, about how you communicate, about others, about how they think. And in a world where we're so disconnected, it's really refreshing.
What are maybe some reasons not to start a podcast? Do you ever talk to people and they say, and then maybe it's not a good idea for them to actually get started?
Well, I mean, it's a lot of work. Like, just if nothing else, and the other thing, and I wouldn't say this is not a reason, but I would say this is a big reason. I would not say it's a reason not to start one. I would say it's a reason people don't start one. Is it's anxiety inducing for most people to put themselves out there to be judged on what they speak on to a crowd.
That was one of the things I wanted to talk to you about. Was that hard for you? I mean, you seem like this has been a somewhat smooth journey for you. I don't know if it was hard for you to push publish on those first few episodes.
So I'm one of those weird people that since I was like 4 years old, I remember like loving public speaking. So I've never had a fear of public speaking, and I understand why that it's like the number one fear. I personally have just never had it. I don't know what it is that helped me overcome that at an early age. Maybe I'm just like a mutant and I'm missing a gene or something along the way. But it just now, do I get nervous speaking in front? Sure, yeah, but like it's not like a debilitating fear in any way. So it was weird initially, but I'm also really good at not being a perfectionist on that front. So my wife, if she had to put out a podcast, we'd be spending 6 months on just like perfecting the title, right? Me, I'm like, whatever, man, just throw it at the wall and see what sticks. Um, so it, I
Well, there's
guess it
different
was.
fears, right? Like there's also the fear of being judged. Like I also like public speaking, but I think I still have concerns about when I make something to put it out into the world and just what the world will think of it beyond just the public speaking part of it, right?
I think the thing that helped me was feedback initially was just so overwhelmingly positive that it was just a positive feedback loop. It might have turned out different if like the first 5 people that had gotten back to me were like, that was trash, bro. Right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
but it wasn't. The feedback was really positive. So it made me go like, oh, there's something here.
Has podcasting made your life worse in any way?
Has it made it worse? Um, During the peak of like the psychotic America's losing their mind phase of like 2019, 2020, because my title was millennial manhood, certain people would like have certain preconceived notions.
Sure. I was thinking
And
that when you mentioned the title, I was like, I wonder if you started a podcast today with that title, how that would go.
yeah, and I remember just being it just solidified to me that those people were insane. Because the way that people like, first of all right, look, let's just call it what it is. I'm 6'3", 230 pounds. I can scrap, and I got a lot of guns. If you say some shit like that to me in the streets, like we got a problem, right?
Right.
And I'm gonna like walk, like either we're gonna have a serious problem if you escalate it, or I'm just gonna look at you initially and be like, this person's clearly clinically insane, right?
Right. Yeah.
Whereas on the internet, it's like people just lose their damn minds and act all kinds of ways, and it just solidified to me. It just solidified to me that those people are insane.
Yeah. I mean, the internet definitely emboldens people to be their worst selves and say stuff they'd never say face to face.
You would never say some of this crap. And it's made me a nicer person. I never really bought into, like, I'm not very active on social media and things like that. Like, I don't actively go out of my way to be a dick to people. But it like deeply solidified to me. It was like, oh no, like these people are actually clinically insane. Like they have a problem. And it's not like that happened very often, but what it did happen, it was just so intense. It was like, dude, you know nothing about me and you've lost your mind. Like, it's like it's really scary when you think about it.
Yeah.
And it's really scary for me, you know, growing up and, you know, being from a country where a civil war happened, which is the reason that I'm in America. I tell people all the time that civil war happened and the atrocities during that civil war happened because all the normal people left. So you're
Right.
just left with the crazies.
Yeah. Yeah. There's some crazies
And
out there for sure.
yeah, and it's a scary thought of creating crazies.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. You know, when you're interacting with people in public, you just sometimes you just got to be careful. You don't know what they're going to do. So it is probably best to just.
Well, especially since having a kid.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and I know you live in New York City. I live in Tennessee. It's a little bit of a different culture, especially with, you know, defending your home. But I was never, this is actually a mindset shift that happened after I became a father. I was never a big firearm person. But once I became a dad, it became very clear to me, like, you're breaking into my house, you're dying.
Yeah.
Like, I might die with you, but you're dying because
Right.
I have a child in this house, and you are not touching this child.
Right. Yeah.
And that's a pretty big mindset shift for me as I became a dad.
When you work with people that are starting up podcasts and maybe you work with them for a while after they start, how do people know when to keep going, when to call it quits? I feel like it's easy to get focused on the metrics, but certainly early on, it's probably not the best thing to focus on. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I believe a couple of years ago, it was 97% of podcasts end before episode 13.
Yeah.
So I always tell people, like, if you're starting this, commit to 13 episodes. I committed to 100 before I released the first episode. My first episode was episode 001. It's 3 digits because I said I'm doing this and I'm doing it to 100 because until I get to 100, I don't really know what I'm doing. But for people who are less extreme than me, I tell people commit to at least 13 episodes.
How long did that take, by the way, to do 100? Were you doing it weekly at the time?
Yeah, I was doing it weekly, like 2 years, 3 years.
Yeah.
At this point, I put out episodes of Road Less Babble whenever I feel like it, just because there's other commitments in place, and I feel like it's kind of run its course. I've got other podcasts that I'm doing, one for a nonprofit and a couple other ones that I'm consulting on. And I don't know, I might pick it back up to a more regular cadence, but you know this, like with a small kid, like I'd much rather be spending time with my daughter than, you know, scrambling to get an episode in for this week.
Right.
Just because your priorities kind of shift.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of which, you run a podcast, you have a day job, you have other side hustles and you also have a child. So how do you balance all that?
Man, do I balance it all? That's a good question. Um, I'm pretty ruthless with my time at this point. I've gotten good at saying no. I have a planner that I designed myself for my life in particular. So for years, I've been trying to find a planner that works for me. And eventually I was just like, none of these work for me because none of them are for me because they have to be mass marketed. So let me just make my own. So that helps me a lot. Organize my thoughts. I journal a lot. Um, when I journal in particular, it helps me a lot. Just kind of think through things and think through things strategically. What's important? What am I trying to accomplish? Why am I trying to accomplish it? Where am I trying to go, etc. And the more you think about it, and the more you just remind yourself of your goals, the more like zoned in you can get on the things you need to do. Like I don't work past 5. I just don't. Like I don't really care what the problem is. Nothing is that urgent. I take as much time off as I possibly can because I am not a believer in working to live. 20 years from now, I'm not going to look up and be like, man, I wish I would have spent a little bit more time working. I'm going to look up and be like, damn, I wish I would have gone to the park with Perry that one time, right? So the biggest thing I would tell folks is just become ruthless with the word no.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And also like let's talk about it within the context of like a corporate gig. How many stupid sales meetings do we all have if we're in sales?
Oh yeah. Yeah, there's a lot there's a lot of meetings that could have been emails or could have been Slack messages.
I've just gotten really ruthless at those. I'm like, I'm not coming to that. It's like, are we required? No. Okay.
Right.
Why? What's going to get accomplished there?
Right. Yeah. Do you think that your journey as a podcaster has informed the way that you're a parent in any way?
Yes. I have become significantly more sympathetic to different worldviews being a podcaster because of how many people I've interviewed
Yeah.
and just understanding. I was always fairly good at that again because of my background. Um, and understanding like just even speaking 3 languages, you kind of understand that, this is a tish, this is a stool, this is a table, it's the same thing. It's just being spoken about in different ways, but understanding that like the way a sentence is structured completely can change the way you think about something and the words you use and the conjugations you use, etc. In these different languages, you can be talking about the same exact thing and have a completely different view of it. That always helped me, but specifically like talking to humans and hearing their stories and hearing their perspectives, and even those perspectives challenging my perspectives, um, it's made me more sympathetic towards my child, and it's made me more sympathetic towards other people's children. Um, and 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 also understanding that not all kids are going to have the same privileges that my children will have simply due to the fact of who their parents are, right? Um, that's actually been kind of hard to swallow because it makes me really sad.
Yeah. What about the actual formatting of the podcast? I'm curious if you have any
Hmm.
thoughts on the way that it's structured. I think everybody does the interview format. Do you have
Right.
any? Is that still the way to go, or what do you suggest people do?
I like the interview format, and then the other format that I like, which is something I'm working on, is the documentary format. So there are a couple of documentaries that I'm planning on putting out, and that I'm in the initial stages of formulating, which I think could be a fun next project for me. But in the interview format, my personal favorite is no questions planned ahead of time. I love the Larry King approach. I want to know as little about you as possible, and I want to see where my natural curiosity takes it. And I think that is the key in a lot of ways to what I do that makes it genuine and good. But even if people do have questions, because I did one not too long ago where we had a bunch of questions, that's totally fine. But also being willing and able to divert if needed. Um, because there are certain podcasts out there where it's very obvious they're being very robotic, and I just think like again, you can have the question sprinkled in, but be willing to go off topic or somewhere else if something's really interesting. Because how many times do you listen to something, you're like, no, that's really interesting. Why are you not following up on this? This
Yeah,
is so
yeah,
cool. I want to learn more.
yeah. I know it's almost like you wish you could like control the way the podcast goes sometimes when you're listening, right?
Right, right. And that's really interesting. Once you have some episodes under your belt, you start kind of judging how people do their interviews. You're
Yeah,
like, well, I would have done that differently.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so I mean, it works itself out.
aside from the monetization concept, what about just growing the podcast, getting more followers? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm not a good social media person, dude. Like, again, a lot of it comes down to just like me thinking it's super toxic, and corroding all of our minds. I purely did it off of word of mouth. Um, and what I would do is I would interview somebody and then I would say, hey, you know, I'm going to put a little package together for you that you can share in your social media once it's done, yada, yada, yada. And then I would ask them for referrals to other people to interview within their network. So I wanted to basically create like a cool clique within high school, but I'm the high school, right? So it just kind of created this network effect where fundamentally what would happen is somebody would see maybe in their network 3 or 4 people getting interviewed by the same exact podcast, and then like it would trigger them to listen. Um, so I was very strategic about things like that. But I just can't get into the whole social media thing. I know that you can get a huge following off of TikTok, Reels, things like that. Personally, I'm not the expert on that. Like, I'll help you edit this thing, put it together, format it, teach you how to communicate effectively, teach you how to ask questions effectively, help you think through like how do you want to structure a podcast, etc. But when it comes to like actual social media and things like that, I just I wish I cared, but I just don't.
When it comes to like the bare minimum tech stack,
Okay.
what people listening, they're inspired by what you're saying, they're fired up. What do you need to before you can just hit play and publish an episode of a podcast?
You need a Blue Yeti microphone as a minimum, is what I would recommend. Which is what, $120, I think now.
Not even. That's one I have.
Yeah, it's
I
the
think it's like
first one I ever
$80.
used. Yeah, they go on sale all the time. Blue Yeti specifically, not the Blue Snowball, not the Blue Yeti. It's a
Mhm.
USB mic. It's super simple, plug and play, run with it. You need some headphones. I actually can't find my headphones right now. I don't know where they went for some reason, so I'm using Apple headphones. But the headphones, typically, I recommend like some sort of noise canceling like wired headphones for like $30. You can get them at Best Buy or Walmart or wherever. So what
Yeah.
are we at? 110?
Yeah.
Okay, you need a computer. Everybody's got a computer,
Hmm.
so I'm not going to count that as an
Yeah,
expense.
that's zero.
Yeah, and then you need either like a Zencaster, which is what we're using, or a Riverside FM, or some podcast specific recording tool. They're typically $20 to $25 a month, and then you need Dropbox, $10 a month. And Audacity as an editing tool is free, so you need $110 up front, and then $30 a month. Don't overcomplicate this. Don't go buying a Rode Procaster for $800. Don't go buying my mic, and my mic arm is $200. Like, I'm not using that camera right now, but I have a $2,000 camera that I use. Like, don't get any of that. Like, I used all of that because I got to a point where one, I had some money made off it, I could afford it, and I wanted it, right? But that was like 80, 90 episodes in. Um, the first 60 episodes were on a Blue Yeti. There's no need to do any of that. Once you get further and you really enjoy it and you have fun with it, and people are asking you to do podcast interviews and you want to make sure you're providing the highest quality audio for them and video and things like that, then fine. But yeah, the tech stack is super simple.
Yeah. No, and that's you basically just laid out exactly what I had set up when I started, and yeah, it's really very low cost to get started. It's really just your time.
Yeah, your time and your willingness to ask somebody to hop on a recording with you,
Sure.
and then your ability to sell them on that.
Right.
That's the other part.
Yeah. All right, we're going to move into the final segment called Yava's Advice Corner. So I'm going to ask you for some advice on a few different topics.
That sounds
Ready?
terrifying, but okay.
Well, first, I think to recap, what's your biggest piece of advice if somebody is thinking about starting a podcast?
Just do it. Don't overthink it. Just do it. Just try it. 13 episodes. The worst thing that can happen is they suck.
Yeah. And they just disappear forever.
They disappear and you learn something really cool and really new. You can say you tried a podcast.
Yeah. What's your biggest piece of advice for work-life balance?
Say no. Time block and say no.
What is your best advice for self-care?
That's a really good question. Do you have a specific definition of self-care?
Either physically or mentally taking care of yourself.
Dude, okay. I'm about to blow y'all's minds. At least it blew my mind. All right.
Okay.
I interviewed a guy years ago named Dr. Ben Hardy. Look him up. New York Times bestselling author, multiple books. Actually did a 3-book series with Dan Sullivan, the founder of Strategic Coach. And it was one of the best interviews I ever did. Like I just learned so much from him, and I've been following him ever since. And I actually watched a YouTube video of his after he released. I'm trying to think which book he had just released. Anyway, he had just released this book, and he was talking about journaling. And I'd been trying to journal for years, and it never stuck. And he said something powerful in there. He said, "Look, stop trying to journal as if you're on the Oregon Trail in the 1850s, where you're writing down like, and on this day in the year of our Lord, we blah 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 blah." He was like, "The point of journaling is for you to get your thoughts on paper and for you to reconcile your thoughts with your actions and to think through this. Write the way you think. Nobody will ever read this, including yourself." And that was just, I mean, it blew my mind because I had been always trying to journal the way you see it in movies, like in some sort of like
Yeah.
prose, as if I'm like,
Romantic way, yeah.
yeah, as if I'm supposed to write out an iambic pentameter or something, right? So,
Great reference, by the way.
right. So, I started doing it the way he did it, and I think in bullet points. So I just bullet point in the journal, and I've been crushing, and it's been one of the most impactful things in my life because it forces you to constantly come to terms with the crap you're doing and the things you want to accomplish.
I like that one. What advice do you have for a new parent who still has a career that they want to focus on?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a time management thing and a priorities thing. Um, I think we do a really bad job as a society of preparing parents for just how awesome it is to be a parent. And yes, all the crap that comes along with it. You're tired, you're exhausted. Did I say you're tired? Um, your time becomes more condensed, etc. But it's so fun and so validating and so fulfilling, um, that everything else in the weird way can go by the wayside at times. But then also there's the other side of that where it's like you freak out so much, like I got to take care of this little human, yada yada yada. So like career becomes all or nothing, and it's just like, man, you got to find the balance. Like you got to have spend quality time with your kid. You got to become ruthlessly efficient at your work.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I feel like parenting has like kind of a bad brand out there sometimes, and people make you seem like it's gonna be the worst thing ever.
Especially amongst us millennials. I don't know
Yeah.
what the deal is. Like, who pissed in our Cheerios?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it is hard, of course, but it's great. It's incredible. What is the best advice you've ever received
Oh,
about any topic, whatever comes to mind?
my dad's a very wise man. He always said to keep in mind that you can't go to the store and buy experience. Like you can't go to Walmart or Target or wherever and buy 3 pounds of experience. You have to feel it on your own flesh. And he's always said like life is like you're walking through a hallway and the hallway's getting narrower and narrower as you keep walking. And you find out that the walls of the hallway are actually made out of glass shards. And you have to work your way through that hallway. And every single glass cut is a piece of experience. And you'll come out on the other end completely, destroyed by the glass, but you'll come out stronger. And I really have taken that to heart. From an early age. And it's interesting. It took me a long time to realize that not everybody's dad gave him advice like that, like just raw advice about life. And I've found myself much more capable than my friends at managing all the crap that happens in life. When you're out of the family household, when you're exposed to the world on your own, when you've got all these things like punching you in the face, just accepting the fact that there's been 100 billion people that have lived since the dawn of man. There's nothing you can experience that somebody hasn't experienced before you or somebody will experience after you. You're not special. It's just your turn. So just like go through your turn.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like in general, we are not really well equipped to deal with the hardships of life in this generation, in this era, I feel like. And it's great that your dad kind of gave you that.
Well, and particularly in this country.
Yeah.
Like we have this weird notion, like, bro, I've seen poverty. Like, we have this weird notion in America as if we have it hard. Yes, each individual person can have it hard, but like generally as a society, we are obnoxiously rich for the amount of work we do.
Sure. Yeah. What advice would you give to your former self?
What would I give to my former self? At what age?
Let's say 18.
18. Oh shit. Wide-eyed and bushy-tailed. Full of just unwavering confidence,
Yeah,
like the rational 18-year-old
I
confidence. I love
know.
it.
I know.
Oh man. I would say slow down. It ain't that crucial for you to get everywhere you want to get that fast.
Yeah,
I wanted to be rich. I wanted to be successful. I wanted all these different things very early. And the older I get, the more I'm like, you don't have to do it that fast, bro. It's okay.
sure.
And I think that would have saved me a lot of heartache and frustration and health issues and things along those lines.
Right. All right, last question. When this episode comes out, my daughter will be about 9 months old. So,
Mm-hmm.
what advice do you have for me as the father of a 9 month old daughter?
9 month old. I'm trying to think back at 9 months old. 9 months old is really fun as the dad because you're more and more becoming like a real human to her. Um, like, because like, let's be real, for like the first 4 or 5 months, like the baby could care less that you exist. Like you're basically just like providing a paycheck, right? Like you're making you're completely useless. And
Yeah.
then around like 4 or 5 months, they start recognizing you and they get like excited when they see you. You're like, oh my gosh, this is the greatest thing I've ever
Yeah,
experienced in my life.
that really changes the game a lot.
Yeah, I feel like at 9 months is like where they really start being fun because they start being really mobile. They start moving around. They really recognize you. They start playing with you. And like I promise you, dude, like every day moving after, it's just like the best day of your life every day.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
last night, I went with my daughter to this like indoor jungle gym out here, and it's a super cool place. And it was just me and her, and we were playing. And then afterwards, went and got ice cream, and it's just like dude, like I'm like tearing up right now. Like you're walking to the ice cream place, and I'm just like holding her hand. And I look down on her, and I say, I love you, Perry. And she looks at me, she's like, I love you. And then just keeps looking forward, just like keeps going straight. And it's just,
So
dude, it's just
cute.
so cool. It's
Yeah,
so cool.
that's awesome. All right. Well, yeah, so this has been great. Where can people go to connect with you, learn more about you, anything you'd like to share or promote?
Work with Yav, work with jov.com is the easiest way. You can also find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. It's probably the only social media I actually keep track of. So I actually read my messages there, which I delete a lot of them because they're trying to sell me, I don't know, podcast editing or something.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
but the real human beings, you will get a response from me. So that's by far the easiest way to get a hold of me. Also, I'm going to go ahead and drop this. This is not released yet, but I'm going to go ahead and drop the domain. So if you go to it and it doesn't go to anything yet, it's because the website hasn't been released yet. But purchasepod.com. Check out purchasepod.com.
Ooh,
Um,
exclusive.
yeah, that actually this is the first drop. This is the first drop
Wow.
where I've talked about it. So and it's not even live yet. So maybe somebody will listen to it in 3 months from now and be like, oh, what a great drop. So
What is it?
but well, I'm still keeping that under wraps. So you just got to go to the website eventually.
Okay. Oh, I can't wait. Now I'm
I'm
fired
just
up.
I'm going to get people to just like keep coming to the website because it'll be a mystery. It'll be like a drop.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, I'll put all that in the show notes. Jovica Djurdjević, ladies and gentlemen. Jovica, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tone. I appreciate it.
All right.